Odin traded his own eye to see the end of the world. He hanged himself on the world tree for 9 nights and 9 days, pierced by his own spear, to learn the secrets of what was coming. And at the very end of all that knowledge, the thing he saw was a face. The face of the one who would kill him. Odin knew that face. He saw it every day at his own table, in his own hall, laughing at his own jokes. And so the wisest of all the gods did the single most reckless thing a king can do. He looked at the being who would one day burn his world to ash and swallow him whole, and instead of killing him, he opened his own palm with a blade, mixed his blood with his future killer's, and swore a sacred oath to protect him forever. The being he protected was named Loki. And the question this entire story turns on is the one Odin never answered out loud. If you knew with certainty the face of the one who would destroy everything you loved, why would you keep him at your side? Hold on to that question. Because the gods of Asgard kept their destroyer for a very long time, with their eyes fully open, and the reason is stranger than the prophecy itself. Start with what Loki was, because it should have been disqualifying. He was not a god in the way Thor or Frey were gods. By blood, Loki belonged to the enemy. His father was a giant named Farboti, which means cruel striker, an old word for the lightning that splits a tree. His mother was named Blofe, also called Narl, a name tied to leaves and dry pine needles, to tinder. Put the two of them together the way the Old Norse did, and you get the thing that is born when lightning comes down into dry tinder. You get wildfire. That is what Loki was. A spark loose in a hall built of wood. He came from the Jotnar, the giants, the ancient forces of cold and chaos that the gods of Asgard existed to hold back. He was, by birth, exactly the thing the walls were built to keep out. And yet he was inside the walls, because Odin himself had brought him in and made him a brother by blood, sworn so deeply that the texts say Odin would not even take a drink unless Loki was served first. The enemy was not marching on the walls of Asgard. The enemy was sitting next to the king. So the question sharpens. You do not swear an unbreakable oath to a stranger. What did Loki give the gods that was worth that? The answer is that Loki was the mind that solved the problem no honest mind could solve. And the clearest proof of it begins, the way these things often did, with one of his cruel jokes. He slipped into the bedchamber of Thor's wife, Sif, and sheared the golden hair from her head while she slept. When Thor found out, he seized Loki and began, slowly, to break him. And he would have broken every bone in his body, one at a time, if Loki had not sworn to make it right. So Loki went down beneath the world, into the dark forges of the dwarves, and there he did something that tells you everything about him. He was not content to simply fix his mistake. He turned it into a wager, and he bet his own head that the dwarves could not forge the finest treasures the gods had ever seen. Picture the stakes. Loki, who has just escaped one death by a promise, now gambling his actual skull on the skill of strangers. And to win, he cheats. He turns himself into a biting fly and torments the smith at the forge, landing on his eyelids, drawing blood, trying to ruin the work. The distraction nearly succeeds. The dwarf flinches at the final moment, and the hammer he is forging comes out with a handle a little too short. But that hammer was Mjolnir, the single most important weapon the gods of Asgard would ever hold. Their one reliable defense against the giants came into the world with a permanent flaw, because Loki shaved a goddess in her sleep and then tried to sabotage the very smith who saved him. He lost the bet. His head belonged to the dwarves, fairly won, and he let them raise the blade. He waited until the cold iron was at his throat before he sprang the trap and pointed out that they had been promised his head, but not 1 inch of his neck, and they could not take the one without cutting the other. Outraged and bound by their own bargain, the dwarves settled for a crueler answer. They drove an awl through his lips and sewed his mouth shut with a leather cord. That is Loki entire in a single image. He escapes death on a technicality. He walks away with his mouth stitched closed, and the gods are richer and stronger than they have ever been, because of him. They unstitched him. They always unstitched him. As long as he kept handing them weapons that could level mountains, they were willing to look away from what he was. But every time they used him, the price went up. When a builder came to Asgard offering to raise a wall so high no giant could ever breach it, his price was the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya. And it was Loki who talked the gods into accepting, certain the builder could never finish in time. The builder almost did. He had a stallion that hauled stone through the nights at an impossible pace, and with 3 days left the wall was nearly whole, and the gods, about to lose the sun itself, turned on Loki and promised him a death worse than any he had escaped yet. So Loki saved them again, the only way he could. Under the threat of having his bones crushed one by one, he violated the laws of nature. He shed his own form, took the shape of a mare, and led that stallion away into the lightless forest, not as a joke, but as an act of pure desperation. The builder failed, revealed himself as a giant, and Thor crushed his skull. And months later, Loki returned to Asgard, carrying the scars of an unnatural pregnancy. He was the mother of a grey foal with 8 legs, the fastest horse in all the worlds, a horse named Sleipnir, who became the personal steed of the king of the gods. Rides a horse that his blood brother carried in his own body. That is how deep Loki ran in that world. And here, the story turns dark in a way it does not come back from, because Loki had other children fathered out in the land of the giants on a giantess named Angerbodr. There were 3 of them: a wolf named Fenrir, a serpent named Jormungandr, and a daughter, half a living woman and half a corpse, named Hel. And when the gods learned what was growing up out there in the east, they did not wait. They mounted what can only be called a raid, and dragged 3 silent, strange children out of the east. They threw the serpent into the ocean that rings the world, where it grew until it circled the whole earth. They gave the half-dead daughter an entire kingdom of the dead to rule. And the wolf they kept and tried to raise and bound in chains when he grew too vast to control. But here is the detail that should stop you. The gods did not act out of simple fear. They acted because of the prophecy. Odin had spent his eye and hung on the tree to learn exactly how the world ends, and the prophecy named these 3. It said the serpent would kill Thor. It said the wolf would swallow Odin whole. These were not random monsters the gods happened to fear. They were the named instruments of the end. And the gods, knowing that, reached out and bound them and cast them down before they had done a single thing. They took a serpent and a wolf and a grieving daughter, and they taught all 3 exactly how much the gods of Asgard hated them. Years before any prophecy had to. The prophecy did not just predict the hatred, the gods built it. And still, they kept Loki. Years passed, and the father of the 3 monsters remained at the center of Asgard, the problem solver, the brother, the necessary one. Until the day he did the one thing that could not be forgiven, the day he stopped being a trickster and became a murderer. The day he killed the brightest of them all. His name was Baldr, the most beloved of the gods, the son of Odin and Frigg, so radiant that the whole world loved to look at him. When Baldr began to dream of his own death, his mother Frigg went out across all of creation and made every single thing swear an oath never to harm her son. Fire, iron, stone, sickness, every beast, every plant. She built an impenetrable wall around her son, forcing every force in the cosmos to sign a pact of non-aggression. Except for one. A sprig of mistletoe growing west of the hall, too young, she thought, to bother asking. One overlooked detail. And Loki did not go looking for a weapon of iron. He went looking for the loop, and he found it in a fragile green parasite growing where no one thought to ask. What he did next was not chaos. It was patient and cold. He shaped the mistletoe into a dart. Then he went to the edge of the game, to the one god standing apart in the dark, taking no part because he was blind. A god named Hod, Baldr's own brother. Loki did not throw the dart himself. He put it into the hand of an innocent, blind brother and guided his aim so that the killing blow would fall from Baldr's own family. And the one thing in all the world that had never sworn the oath passed clean through the brightest god and killed him where he stood. There was still a way back. The ruler of the dead agreed to release Baldr on one condition, that every living thing in all the worlds wait for him. So the messengers went out, and all creation grieved. Every god wept, every giant wept, stone wept, and metal, and every beast and every tree, the whole of existence crying out for the bright god to return. Except for one. Deep in a lightless cave sat a single giantess who would not be moved, and when the messengers begged her to weep, a voice came out of the dark and said, "Let the dead keep what is theirs." And she did not shed a tear. One voice, sentencing the world to the cold. And because of that one refusal, Baldr stayed dead forever. Only later did the gods understand what they should have known the moment they heard it. There was no giantess in that cave. There was only Loki, who had murdered the bright god and then crept into the dark to make certain he could never come back. Now the gods were done, and they hunted him, and what followed was the one contest Loki should have won, because it was a contest of minds. He fled into the mountains to a place called Frananga, and he took the form of a silver salmon and slipped between the stones of a waterfall where nothing could track him. But Loki was a creature who could never stop solving problems, even hidden, even hunted. Sitting alone in a mountain hut, waiting, he took flax and yarn and wove them together into crossing meshes and invented the very first fishing net, simply to feed himself. And when he heard the heavy footsteps of the gods coming up the mountain, he panicked, and he threw the net into the fire and leapt out the window into the falls. But when the gods came through the door, they did not find him. They found a cold hearth, and in it a pile of pale wood ash. And it was Kvasir, the wisest of them all, who knelt down in front of that fire and did not see dust. He saw the faint skeleton of a pattern burned into the ash, the shape of crossing threads, a device built to pull living things out of deep water. Using the blueprint Loki had left behind in his own fireplace, the gods spun their own flax and made an identical net, and they waded into the freezing river and dragged it across the bed. Loki, trapped between the net and the open sea, made a single desperate leap up and over the top of it, his scales catching the pale mountain light. And Thor was waiting in the spray. He closed his hand around the salmon as it jumped, and it was so slick it nearly slid free, until Thor crushed his grip down at the very base of the tail. The Old Norse said that is why the salmon is slim at the tail to this day. The chess match was over. And the cruelest part of it is the simplest. The mind that had saved the gods 100 times had left them the exact blueprint they needed to destroy it. What they did to him after that is the part the stories tell slowly. They took 2 of his sons. The surviving manuscripts cannot even agree on the names. Some say a son named Vali was turned into a wolf and tore apart his brother Nafi. Others reverse the 2, but every version agrees on the horror. One brother was made a beast, and that beast killed the other, and from the entrails of the murdered son, the gods bound their father to 3 sharp stones beneath the earth. To punish a monster, the golden gods of Asgard had to become far more monstrous than the killer they were binding. And above Loki's face they fixed a serpent so that its venom would drip, slowly, forever, onto his eyes. And this is where the true horror of it lives, and it is not Loki. It is his wife. Her name was Sigyn. The name is usually translated as victory friend, but the oldest root buried underneath it points somewhere far darker. It means, roughly, she of the pouring. Before the gods ever bound her husband, before Baldr ever dreamed of his death, before any of it, her very name was already tied to the single act that would come to define her. She had done nothing. She had not murdered Baldr. She had not bred the monsters. She had not bred the monsters. She had not plotted against a single god. And she followed her husband down into the dark anyway, and she stayed. She sits beside him in that cave, holding a wooden bowl above his face to catch the venom before it falls. But a bowl fills, and when it is full, she has to turn away to empty it. And in those few moments, the poison strikes Loki full in the eyes, and he convulses against his chains so violently that the whole earth shakes. The Norse said that is what an earthquake is. It is a bound god recoiling from venom in the dark, in the instant his innocent wife turns to pour out a bowl. The gods did not only punish their destroyer. They condemned a woman who was guilty of nothing to an eternity of holding back the poison, alone, with arms that never stop aching. He stays there until the end of the world. And the texts say that when the end comes, the chains finally break. The earth shakes hard enough to shatter them, and Loki rises. He goes to a ship called Naglfar, a ship built entirely from the untrimmed fingernails of the dead, which is why the Old Norse were careful to cut the nails of the dead before burial, so that the ship of the end would be slower to finish. Every body buried with its nails, uncut-handed, another plank to the destroyer. The sources differ on who steers it. Snorri, in the Prose Edda, hands the helm to a giant named Rim. But the older, colder verses of the Völuspá put Loki himself at the wheel. Either way, that ship sails at the head of the armies of the giants and the dead against the golden gates of Asgard, exactly as the prophecy always said it would. And on the final field, Loki meets Heimdall, the watchman who stood guard at the Rainbow Bridge for the entire history of the world, waiting for the trickster and the watchman kill each other there, together, at the end of everything. So now you have all of it. And the question from the beginning is still standing. Why did they keep him? Knowing the face, knowing the prophecy, knowing the children. Why did the wisest beings in creation raise the one who would burn it all down? Here is the answer. The whole story has been circling. A world with no Loki in it is a world that cannot change. He was the crack in the wall, the thing that broke the rules, the only mind among them that could make something. The gods could not have their hammer, their walls, their eight-legged horse, their very ability to be surprised, without the one who also brought the ending. He was not a flaw in their world. He was the price of their world being alive at all. They kept him because they had no choice, and they knew it. But there is a darker answer hiding underneath that one, and the texts will not tell you which is true. Maybe Loki was always going to destroy them. Or maybe he was not. Maybe a serpent thrown into the sea, and a wolf bound in chains, and 3 children dragged out of the east, and a father tortured in the dark, learned to become exactly the thing they were accused of being. Odin traded his eye to see the future and saw a monster. And then the gods spent 1,000 years, with all their cruelty, making absolutely certain that the monster came true. Asgard did not fall to an evil that came from outside. It fell to a tragedy it built with its own hands. This is Pantheon X, where we tell the oldest stories the world ever dared to tell from the source. The gods of the North knew their ending and walked toward it anyway, and there is far more of their world still to come. Subscribe and stay close to the fire.